Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Front Row Fridays. I'm Christen, Brandt, co-founder and Chief Programs Officer for She's the First, and I'm so excited to be with you here for another edition. So as many of you know, we call this Front Row Fridays for two reasons. First, it's because the Front Row is the name of our monthly giving community. And that community is really what sustains She's the First because it allows us to understand how much we have in funding coming in every month, and it just gives nonprofits the ability to plan. So we wanted to name this in their honor because of that. Secondly, we call it the front row because it really gives all of you an opportunity to get a front row seat to learn from some of the world's girl experts that we're lucky enough to call friends of She's the First. So today we're supposed to have a conversation with Scheaffer Okore and Tara Abrahams, but unfortunately in Nairobi, Scheaffer's hometown, there are massive power outages right now. And so our hope is that power will come back and she'll be able to join us later in this conversation. But if that doesn't happen, I'm going to be sure to bring her back for a future conversation so you don't miss out on some of her incredible thought leadership. But we do have Tara Abrahams today, and I'm so excited to still be able to have this conversation with her for you on women in leadership, because Tara is someone who has been working in the girl space for a long time and has an incredible amount of experience and knowledge and, frankly, wisdom about these issues. So currently, she's a senior advisor at Arabella Partners. But she's also worked at VOW, which is an initiative to end child marriage. She's worked for Girl Rising. She's worked for ICRW. She's consulted for the Obama Foundation on their Girls Opportunity Alliance. She was the managing director of the Girl Project at Glamour. And she also happens to be the chair of the She's the First board. So today, friends, I am essentially interviewing for you, my boss. So without further ado, I would love to bring Tara Abrahams into the chat.
Hello. Hi, Christen. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tara. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Such a nice thing to look forward to on a Friday.
Yeah. So I just gave a little bit of your resume credentials, but because you are so invested in girls' work and you're so passionate about it, I think our audience would love to hear from you about what brought you to this work. How did you end up here in the girls' space? And just tell us a little bit about your personal journey.
Sure. It really actually goes in parallel with She's the First journey a little bit. Almost 10 years ago, I kind of stumbled into the girls' space by virtue of a serendipitous meeting I had with the co-founder of what would eventually become Girl Rising, a global campaign to raise awareness about the importance of educating girls in the developing world. And I truly stumbled into it. I'd always had a career that was focused on social impact, I'm proud to say. But to be honest, I didn't really have an issue that connected with me so deeply that it really got me kind of racing out of bed in the morning and wouldn't let me sleep at night because I was so consumed by this is the issue I want to be making an impact on and how am I going to do it. So this meeting came along at a time when I was really searching, and I was so fortunate and lucky. I wish there was a template from that kind of accidental beginning that I could share with everyone. I guess I would say that the lesson for me has been just be open to interesting conversations, ideas, read a lot, because you never know when that lightning will strike the way that it did for me. But to take you back to that moment, I was basically sitting there with Holly Gordon, a friend and mentor now, who's also incredibly a powerful champion for girls in the space. And she was telling me all about this idea of we want to make a film, we want to create a campaign that talks to people about how educating girls can unlock so much opportunity, not just for the girls themselves, but also for their families, for their communities, and for entire countries. Because when you are able to educate a girl, all of these extraordinary things begin to happen. And it was truly like a lightning bolt had hit me, as if I had finally found the thing that was going to carry me forward in my career, and about which I could be passionate and excited for the rest of my life and career. I will mention a personal detail, which is that around the same time, I found out that I was pregnant with my first baby. who I had found out was a daughter. So I was thinking about a lot of these things. I was thinking about, okay, what do I want my professional life to look like now that I'm about to become a parent? And I do think that that particular moment had me considering a lot about legacy. What is it I want to leave for this growing thing inside me? And so for me, all of this came together in this moment around discovering, massive inequalities and inequities with respect to girls and women and how they are forced to live their lives, not just in countries around the world, but certainly within our own borders as well. And so to me, talk about life's work, right? I mean, this is really where I envision spending the rest of my career and passion. And it's really gender equality and achieving that vision is really the lens through which I now look through all of my work, professional, but also the way that I engage in other volunteer activities. Of course, I'm the board chair of She's the First, which is a dream come true in terms of being able to work on this issue. But it's really just kind of transformed my outlook on the world, and I would say for the better.
I really love hearing you talk about this too, because it reminds me so much, as you very well know, Tammy, my co-founder, and I have been working on a book called Impact. And we've just finished up our last round of really hard edits on it before it will be published in November. But a big part of the book is around finding what we call your North Star. What is that issue that lights you up? And a big part of finding it is understanding, what do you want your legacy to be? Just as you said, and kind of connecting that to your legacy. And one of the ways that I knew that we would get along forever was because in your email signature, you have at the bottom of it this phrase. And that phrase is "for all girl kind." Mm-hmm. And the moment, first of all, I had never seen anyone express that before. So I thought it was just really creative. But secondly, that phrase encapsulates so much. And so I knew immediately we'd be lifetime friends. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that phrase in particular and how you came to it, because it is such a powerful framing for this work that you do and that we do.
Yeah. So that's also been a journey. I want to give absolute full credit to a really interesting company and organization called Vaudeville Ventures, with whom I was working a couple of years ago to develop an idea, which I'm still working on, still developing amidst all of this, around creating a platform focused on storytelling by and about girls, but in a truly global sense. So really thinking about the interconnected experience of what it's like to live as a girl, right? Living while girl, I think, is what Judith Bruce, another mentor of ours from the Population Council, always talks about. That's a shared experience. It's one that my daughters will go through. It's something that I went through. It's something that my mother went through. All of the girls with whom we work at She's the First, even though their families may look different, their cultural context may look different, there is this shared experience. And so I was really looking to dip my toe into the kind of entrepreneurial arena. And I was working with Vaudeville Ventures to kind of think about the initial idea, develop it a little bit further. And we were talking about just titles for what this platform could be. And they came up with this idea of combining, again, a play on humankind, certainly mankind, but this idea of girl kind, right? What makes us? And so we played around with that idea for a little while. It was a fun experience. And then for me, it really crystallized when we came to For All Girl Kind, when I went home to that night for dinner or something. And at the time, my oldest daughter, Serena, the one I was pregnant with when I first discovered Girl Rising, she's 7 years old at the time. And I said, Serena, if I said to you that something was For All Girl Kind, what would you think? What would you think that meant and what that was about? And she said, well, it seems like it's sort of like For All Humankind, but it means it's something for all girls. So for me, it sort of crystallized the idea that you could have this very, I think, ambitious and lofty vision, a world that's for all girl kind, but something that, albeit a very smart and sharp 7-year-old, but a 7-year-old nonetheless could really connect. And so for me, it is something that I think about as my kind of driving North Star, as you said, the work that I do being about all girl kind. And, I've been fortunate enough that I'm still on that journey and, really excited about where it takes me in the years ahead.
Yeah. And that actually, as a fun anecdote side note, one of the things we now do at She's the First when we're testing out communications is we do what we call the Serena test, which is the idea that, kind of smart 7-year-old or 8-year-olds, would they understand what this is? Because you want your comms to be crystal clear, right?
Absolutely.
And that was based on that story because we thought it was just brilliant.
Amazing.
So I would love to get kind of into the meat of this. Today, we're supposed to be talking about women in leadership. And I think there's been a lot of rumblings. There have been news stories about women as leaders during COVID and especially in the political arena, what a great job they've been doing, especially compared to some governments. And so I think that there is a lot to this kind of concept of women in leadership. But when we think about leadership in the girl space, many of those leaders are women. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, what does women's leadership look like right now in this space? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And a lot of what I've thought about in preparation for this is certainly my belief that as far as maybe, let's say, style goes, women's leadership doesn't look like any one thing, right? Just as women are so diverse in their backgrounds, in their sensibilities, and in their humanity, so are their leadership styles. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind. There is no one way to be a woman leader. You have to be who you are. You bring your lived experiences, and we would hope, right, the experience of creating empathetic connection with other people around the world to your leadership role, no matter what industry that is or what level you are in a particular company or organization. So that was one of the big things that I wanted to share and talk about with you, is that I don't necessarily feel that there's one way for women to lead. What I do think is very interesting, and I think you're seeing this idea play out in the ways that you've referenced amidst COVID and the pandemic, is I think what women leaders have in common is that lived experience of being a woman and knowing what it's like to not yet have a seat at the table. I think for many women, that is another shared experience. I was thinking too, one of the women that I follow on Twitter and have been tracking for a while now is, I'm going to look at the pronunciation because I don't want to get it incorrectly. Her name is Cassandra Levesque. She's based in New Hampshire. You mentioned that I had done a little bit of work with Vow to End Child Marriage, with an initiative that was focused much more on the global incidence of child marriage, which for those of you who don't know, and She's the First works a lot on this issue as well, 12 million girls every year under the age of 18 are married around the world, particularly in the hotspots like Niger, certain parts of India, lots of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But it happens in the United States as well. And Cassandra Levesque did a Girl Scout Gold Award project when she was 17 years old, researching the issue of child marriage in her home state of New Hampshire. And it turned out that girls as young as 13 years old and boys as young as 14 years old were permitted to get married with a judge's permission. She knew this had to be wrong because she was older than the girls and boys who were able to get married in her state. And so she took that issue to a state legislator to try and get that law appealed or adjust the minimum marriage age to at least 18 years old. She was basically laughed out of the representative's office, who said, I don't see the point in listening to a minor about changing a 100-year-old statute that's been on the books for that long. So what did she do? She went out and she decided to run for office herself. And now she's working to change the law herself. As a 19-year-old, I think now, or maybe she's a little bit older, state legislator in New Hampshire, even while she's in college,
so cool.
photography, etc. So I share that story by virtue of I think, an experience that many women at one point or another have had, which is that Cassandra knew what it was like to be told no.
Mm-hmm.
What it was like to not have a seat at the table. And I think that's what women bring to their leadership experience. No matter what their style is, they bring to their leadership and their roles the knowledge and understanding that girls and women are underrepresented in making rooms and are not always present in the minds of those who have power to direct resources, to make large sweeping changes around the way our governments work. We know, right, that we haven't had enough of a voice in the way that our world works and operates. And so I think that is the critical piece that women are bringing to this moment in time. And that will be our legacy, is that experience of understanding what it's like to be ignored and overlooked. And I know that that's a lot of what She's the First is working on right now with respect to the girls and organizations who serve them around the world, who are trying to get people's attention to say, we matter too, and we do, and we need help and we need support. Otherwise, that 12 million girls a year who get married under the age of 18, that number is going to go back up. Going down, and that number is going to go back up. So these are the things that I think about in terms of women as leaders: is what do we bring to a table once we finally get it? And I think it's incumbent upon us. We have a responsibility to think in that way and to really drive our leadership decisions and actions with girls and women always at the forefront of our and in our hearts.
And I think, you talked a bit about there not being any one leadership style, but I think that line of thinking is actually fairly new, because for a long time, women, particularly women who are the first in their field or the first in their company, or, some of the first women on the forefront of getting these leadership positions, really felt that they needed to mimic what we can call traditional masculine qualities. And whether or not they're really masculine qualities is a whole other conversation, but the idea that you have to be strong and firm and you can never be any kind of vulnerable or emotional, or all of these kinds of pieces that created this box in which women as leaders were forced to exist. And I think what is really exciting about both what you're saying and what we're seeing play out is that women are breaking out of that box. They're refusing to stay inside of it, both because I think, to your point, they're not willing to engage in a style of leadership that's going to leave other women and girls behind, but also because of the limiting nature of that. And what we're seeing is that when women and when people are able to express leadership in more than one mode, we actually get much, much improved results from that.
You get better outcomes. And I do believe that. It was something, though, that I came to after a lot of self-reflection and exploration, because to your point, you're right. I think this notion of a diverse set of leadership styles that women can embody, that people can embody, is a relatively recent one. Even in the past 10 years, as I've been in the girls and women's space and taken on different leadership roles, I've been given that feedback. You aren't aggressive enough.
Yeah.
You need to be more forceful. You need to grab a hold of things and just own them, right? And that never felt authentic to me. Be a less successful leader? I don't think so. I don't think it has to be the case. I think that I can bring my own style to that, to a role. And I do think it's something for girls to keep in mind as well, is that people these biases persist, and they are insidious. They're not easy to get rid of, even now, and sort of squarely in my 40s and still working on turning off those voices in my head, turning off the echo of those comments and that feedback, so that I can just be who I feel most authentic being and just do the work. I just want to do the work.
Yeah. I actually read a piece by a psychologist this morning who was talking about how isolation is actually allowing people, and women in particular, to let go of some of the performative aspects of our work personas, of our leadership personas, and really kind of spend some time coming back to what are our own values and what can we live. And whether you're finding that through quarantine and isolation, or you're just coming to that in your life's journey, I think that process of understanding these are my values, and so those are the values with which I'm going to lead, incredibly important. I do want to just call out that we are able to see any questions or comments that everyone is leaving on the Facebook thread. And so if you do have any questions about women in leadership, about anything we're talking about, feel free just to leave your comments and your questions below, because we can see them just like this. And if it's selected to pop up, we can also answer some of those questions along the way. So Tara, earlier this year, I had the exquisite privilege of traveling with you as we went on a learning trip, on a site visit to our partner, Arlington Academy of Hope in Uganda. And this was your first time traveling with She's the First and to a partner of She's the First. And so I wonder, as we think about women in leadership and leadership in this girl space, you spent a lot of that trip getting to know some of the girls and getting to know some of the mentors who were there. And I'm wondering about your reflections on that experience when it comes to these leadership lessons that we're talking about.
I think, well, first of all, the pleasure was all mine. It feels like centuries ago that we had that experience. And I know that you're missing being in the field and connecting with girls, and having had a slight taste of it myself through that trip to Uganda, I can certainly appreciate and empathize with that feeling. It was such a life-changing experience to truly, first of all, see in action She's the First, you, and the work that we do and are able to support through a partner like Arlington Academy of Hope. And then it was life-changing to really see and understand and connect with girls whose dreams and aspirations, particularly around leadership and having a voice, are not so different than our own, of course, because what they want is to be heard, to speak and to be heard, to be free to pursue a career that gives them energy and excites them, allows them to earn a living wage and then some to support their families who have sacrificed so much for their education. I mean, as I say these things, and I'm truly just coming to it now, their stories are not that different from my own, right? And education was such a fundamental value in the way that I grew up. My parents valued education above everything. It's actually been really interesting and fun for them to, because we have so much a window into our kids' education right now, having them at home. It's been really fun for my parents to experience education through their eyes right now, my little kids. But I do think that what was most inspiring about that trip was just understanding that girls have dreams, that they just don't want them to be stomped out. That's it. I mean, is that so much to ask? I don't know. It just feels very powerful. Again, this idea of these simple wishes on the part of girls to be a journalist, to be a lawyer, to be able to fight for other girls, to be able to lead their community. These are not outrageous dreams. They are outrageous in that they might appear so against the context which the girls have to live out those dreams. But at the same time, they're dreams like ours. And so to me, that was really just incredible to be able to share in that experience with them.
Well, and to see one of my favorite experiences anywhere in the world, New York to Nairobi, is seeing girls who are hungry for leadership and going after those opportunities and going after it with abandon, just with no inhibition about the fact that they want to be a leader, they want to lead their communities, they want to, carry the torch forward. And I think, on that trip in Uganda, for example, one of the workshops that we were running while there was a peer educator workshop on life skills. And, you have a group of 40 girls who are just ready to take the information that they have, soak it up, and then bring it out to anyone and everyone they can. And there is something really uplifting about seeing a girl anywhere ready to pick up that torch and ready to lead the way. And that the world is indeed becoming more accepting of girls as leaders as we move forward.
Yeah. And I loved how unafraid they were. They were just kind of completely open in that context, especially the one that Arlington is able to create, I think with the help of She's the First, with some incredible teachers and great facilitators of this training. I think it was amazing to see that they really viewed that space as their own, that physical space as their own, and that they were comfortable taking up that space. They were confident in speaking in a loud volume, that they weren't kind of abashed. And I think that was very powerful for me to see too. And that, I think, stands in contrast to the way that perhaps I was socialized or sort of grew up as the child of immigrants in a very kind of homogenous community where I was very much kind of socialized to take up less space, to be a little more quiet, and to not really step out. And I just loved seeing the girls and how they stepped out.
And owned it, rightfully
so. They did, they owned it. And that it won't always be as easy as it was in that setting. But I love that the training and the education that they're receiving now and that they're kind of grabbing hold of allows them to practice what it feels like to take up space and to have a loud voice, and that those things are okay. And in fact, they may be the things that help you get results and outcomes. And it was just inspiring to witness that.
Yeah.
In real time.
Yeah. So I know we do have a few questions coming in on Facebook, and I want to give us a little bit of time to answer those. So
great.
Let's start with Cassie. Can you share one resource, a book, a podcast, etc., that has enhanced your leadership?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, and Christen, I'm curious on your thoughts here too. One of the books that I read early on in my kind of journey on gender equality and especially with Girl Rising, we were very inspired by Half the Sky. And to me, just from a content perspective and really gaining more of an international perspective on the issues that face women, from health to economic empowerment, and what the gaps are, that was a very kind of grounding piece of research, and to kind of enhance my credibility in the space, because prior to starting with Girl Rising, I had done a lot of work in the social impact space, but none of it was international. None of it was in the field. It was always something to which I had aspired, but it never quite worked out. I just didn't get there. And so the gap that I needed to fill in order to be credible in this space was around that content and that understanding of the issues, the data, which is always key. And in the gender equality space is sometimes you have to go find the data, right? Because part of the dynamics of this work is that we don't have enough information about girls and women and how they live their lives. We need more, right? And I had an interesting conversation this week with someone from the Fuller Project, Santhi Sharf, who's talking about with respect to COVID, even unemployment data related to women is incomplete because but state by state, you need to go search it. Certainly at the federal level, it's incomplete. So in any event, to me, Half the Sky was just really helpful in terms of getting a grounding in, all right, what are we actually talking about? What are the issues and how severe are they?
Yeah. And I think bouncing off of one of your earlier points around, you have all of these people who have been telling you throughout your leadership journey to be less aggressive. I actually needed to balance because I had received so many messages about what a leader should be. In a lot of ways, I, in my own leadership journey, needed permission to be less aggressive, needed permission to be more vulnerable. And so to that end, one of the leadership books that changed my life, that kind of gave me more permission to do that, was Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. And so I think that is a well trotted out advice giving book for a reason. And so I think in combination, just looking for pieces of content that are going to inform, like Half the Sky did for you, but also search out books that are specifically on leadership. Brené Brown is incredible, but there are many. Yeah. So that's
the other one I'll give a shout out to is Reshma Saujani and Brave Not Perfect, because that's a really good one that kind of echoes all of these themes that we've been talking about today around her focus is initially on girls and leadership, but of course they're applicable to women and leadership as well as we kind of go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we do have time for one more question. Thank you. We rock. So the question is, how do you be an effective board or committee member for a nonprofit? How do you become a leader on one?
Good question. I think my story with She's the First is probably pretty illustrative, which is I had my sights on you guys from the very beginning, having started at Girl Rising as as I said, you were just starting out with She's the First. And so as I kind of moved forward with all my various activities and projects in the girls and women's space, I always had my eyes on She's the First. And then there was this great opportunity through my business school alumni association to actually do a pro bono project with She's the First, which I think to the question, Leonora, is great because it basically allowed me to contribute tangible skills to an area of interest for She's the First as a nonprofit organization, where I could essentially prove my value, right? I think that a lot of times what nonprofits really need, I mean, they're typically speaking under-resourced, potentially understaffed, and are looking for certain skill sets that otherwise they wouldn't be able to hire in for just because it wouldn't be efficient, it would be too expensive, et cetera. So if you have a specific skill set in marketing or certainly legal advice, accounting, that's a good place to start. And then I would say on the how do you lead a committee, raise your hand, ask. I have increasingly done that recently with a lot of my other projects and activities, just sort of stepped forward, similar to those girls in Uganda, and taken up space. Yeah. And you'd be surprised at what raising your hand actually results in terms of having a leadership role on a committee that can then lead to even more significant board leadership and all the rest. So I would say if you're looking to get more involved, say so. And say that you'd be interested in leading a committee. And even if it's not the right time now, they'll have you in mind for when there is an opportunity to add someone or to replace someone. And that's just a good way to get started.
Okay, thank you so much, Tara. So we are just about out of time, but if you do have more questions, please feel free to leave them on that Facebook thread. And I will just kindly ask that Tara joins that Facebook thread in order to get back to any of those other questions. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Tara. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Thank you to everybody who's been joining us week after week here on Front Row Fridays. So just again, as a reminder, we call this Front Row Fridays in order to honor our Front Row members. And if you're interested in joining that, you can do it right here at she'sthefirst.org/front row. This week I have a extra special call out for a new front row member, Erica Henningsen, because Erica has recently launched a fundraising initiative for She's the First and is actually doing a concert tonight. So if you want to get involved at that, you can go to she'sthefirst.org/Erica. But I also want to give a shout out to an anniversary member, Kim Nicola Lawrenson, along with other new front row members, including Russell Broyles, Julie McKeon, Kirsten O'Hara, and Carly Ziegler. Thank you all so much for joining the front row, for being part of the front row, and just for joining us here at She's the First and being part of our community. We will see you next week right back here for another edition of Front Row Friday.